In the next hour, 41 children will starve to death in Biafra. That many die every hour. So far, the Nigerian Civil War has claimed well over 1 million lives, and most of them are children. Hundreds of thousands more will die in the next 6 months unless an acute food shortage is overcome. Many Americans are not familiar with what is happening in Biafra today. The sights and sounds of children starving to death, the stench of disease, and the suffering of malnutrition are unknown to many of us.
What do you think about what's happening in Biafra?
Well, that's quite a question. I haven't, I'd have to take a minute to think about that, I believe.
In Biafra, with all the starvation? Well, I believe that it's going on. It's a shame that this must go on.
I don't know too much. Oh, that's secessionist group fighting, huh?
Well, the people are starving to death.
Oh, yeah, they are. That's those same brothers fighting brothers there.
Oh, I think it's a disgrace to all the countries. I think we should all help them. I think it's the most horrible thing that ever happened, and we all should be ashamed of it.
I'm sorry, I don't know enough about it to comment on it. I just haven't kept up with it that much.
Haven't read anything about it for several weeks, but it's probably terrible, whatever is happening.
I think it's very tragic. It seems like the nations of the world, we should be able to get together and stop this ridiculousness that's going on.
I think it's terrible.
Well, frankly, I think it's a shame what's going on, the way they're starving those people there, really.
I think that it's terrible that all those children and people are starving, and I wish that our government would do something about helping them.
Well, it's not very pleasant, I know that. It's not very pleasant. The scene is not very pleasant. What I've seen is not very pleasant to look at.
Well, I think I'd have to study it a little bit more before I'd be able to give you a concrete opinion. I've heard two sides of it, and all I am is a little bit confused right now.
Do you think the United States should officially send food in to these people?
Yes, I think it would be a good cause, and we should help them a little bit.
Well, as I understand it, there are quite a few church organizations and other organizations that are sending food over and whatnot.
Well, the United States plays a part in most everything, so yes, yeah, I do.
I can't answer the United States. I'm not a U.S. citizen.
I think all the nations should. Why should only we?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
I'm Cliff Robertson. Last year, I went to Biafra. Biafra is a small area of Western Africa. Until recently, it was the eastern region of Nigeria. Before 1967, it had a population of some 14 million people in a geographical area of 29,000 square miles. But today, Biafra is at war. Nigeria calls it civil war. Biafra calls it a war for survival. You can judge for yourself. Many of us, unfamiliar with Africa, have preconceived notions about the dark continent and its peoples. And some may still know Africa best for her safaris and her diamond mines. But Africa is much more than any of these things, and the story of the Nigerian war today may tell many things about the Africa of tomorrow. In 1960, after nearly 75 years as a British protectorate, Nigeria was granted her full independence. She formed a federal republic. Geographically, the country and its major ethnic groups were divided by a Y-shaped river system. The Hausa and Fulani peoples lived to the north of the Y. The Yorubas lived to the southwest. and the Igbos populated the southeast. The new republic was initially divided into 3 regions. A 4th was created later. Before the war, Nigeria was the world's 10th largest crude oil producer, with roughly 60% of her known oil reserves in the eastern region. There were high hopes for this 10th most populous country of the world. Traditionally aggressive and industrious, Igbos had more and better schools than any other area of the country. They had many doctors, lawyers, engineers, and other professional people, and a disproportionate share of the civil service, public utility, and jobs of commerce. The price of this success was the enmity of many other groups in Nigeria. For 5 years, the new republic endured much internal strife. National unity foundered. Corruption was widespread. And in January 1966, a group of young army officers from all tribes seized control. They assassinated the prime minister, a northerner and the spiritual leader of Nigeria's Muslims. He was also the head of the northern region and probably the most influential politician in Nigeria. Initially, the coup was popular in all regions. Army Chief of Staff General Ironsi, an Igbo, took over the new federal government. He tried to reassert legality and hold the people together. But fear of Igbo dominance and resentment over the death of the other government leaders grew. Igbophobia developed. And in May of 1966, rioting broke out. Hundreds of Igbos in the north were killed. A counter-coup was staged, and General Ironsi himself was killed. Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a member of a northern minority tribe, was temporarily appointed chief of state. Negotiations for a new constitution aborted, and in September and October, renewed rioting erupted. This time, thousands of Igbos were massacred. The survivors fled to the Igbo heartland in the eastern region. A last attempt at reconciliation was made in January of 1967, when the military governors of all 3 states met in the neighboring African country of Ghana at Aburi. They reached an agreement, but it was short-lived. Each side accused the others of violation. This led to the eastern region withholding revenue from the federal government. And in April, the federal government responded with an economic blockade. General Gowon then issued a decree dividing the regions into 12 states. At this point, the eastern region, headed by Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu, proclaimed its independence as the Republic of Biafra. The other regions refused to allow Biafra to secede from the Republic. The federal government tightened the blockade, and federal troops moved against Biafra. Expecting a short war, at the end of 18 months of fighting, federal troops supplied with Russian MiGs, Egyptian pilots, and British arms reduced the land area of Biafra from 29,000 square miles to roughly 5,000 landlocked miles. Starvation became an acute problem because of the disruption of marketing and farming and because of the blockade. The specter of widespread famine promised worldwide concern. By August 1968, the ICRC estimated 6,000 people were starving to death in Biafra each day. And it was reported that starvation threatened the very existence of the Igbo people. Today, the people of Biafra feel they are fighting for their right to live and their ethnic survival. The official U.S. position is that the Nigerian-Biafran conflict is a civil war, an internal Nigerian problem which must be resolved without outside interference. But the cost is nearly 2 million people already dead, and millions more who will die unless something is done. In 2 years, this civil war has killed more people, mostly children, than the entire war in Vietnam. Nigeria believes that she is right. She has continued the blockade and bombing effort to force Biafra back into the Federation.
We will defend our sovereignty. We will continue to do what is right to restore order to the country and save all Nigerians, including Igbos, from greater disaster. While we have sought peace at Niamey and Addis Ababa, the rebels have acquired more sophisticated arms and increased their activity. Obviously, the federal government must act in time to prevent a sharp deterioration in the military situation. Together with my colleagues in the Supreme Military Council and the armed forces, we have therefore resolved that we must now press on with all our might to defeat the rebels militarily and remove all traces of the tyranny and terror, the rebel regime, from the face of this country.
Biafra, on the other hand, is determined to be independent or to die fighting for that independence.
People of Biafra are fighting for their very survival as a people, for our existence and our survival as a people. And it is our determination that we must survive. The conduct of the war on the part of Nigeria has even made it more clear to us that Nigeria wishes to exterminate the people of Biafra. And therefore we feel that if we have to die, at least we want to choose the way. We want to die, and we are determined to die fighting.
The sides have been drawn, and neither side is willing to compromise, despite repeated and renewed talks of a peace negotiation. Some U.S. congressmen and other leaders have gone to Biafra and Nigeria, and several resolutions have been introduced in Congress calling for large contributions of food and medical supplies, and greater involvement in ways and means of getting the supplies to those in distress. Although the United States government regarded the conflict as a civil war, it has sent considerable quantities of relief supplies and foodstuffs to both sides through international organizations. In fact, by the end of October 1969, it had provided $31.6 million in cash and over $22 million in food and supplies to the Nigerian Biafran relief effort. Relief materials from all over had been distributed to both sides by organizations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, the Joint Church Airlift, UNICEF, the American Jewish Committee, UNESCO, Caritas, and the World Council of Churches. By the fall of 1968, both the ICRC and the churches were flying relief supplies into Biafra at night with DC-6s and 7s provided by the Scandinavian and German churches and Red Cross societies. In January of 1969, the Joint Church Aid was officially formed. It was a consortium of 33 religious groups from 21 countries in Europe and North America. The U.S. members of Joint Church Aid are the American Jewish Relief Council, Catholic Relief Services, and Church World Services. As supplies increased in the spring of 1969, kwashiorkor, the disease of severe protein deficiency, and even general starvation abated. But Biafra began to receive reinforcements of weapons and ammunition in night flights to the airstrip at Uli, the same field being used to handle the relief flights. Neither side secured a definitive military victory in those months. As the fighting followed the weather cycle, the offensive came mostly in the dry season. And in late 1969, the Biafrans staged air raids on Nigerian oil resources, shipping lines, and planes. They used small training planes under the command of the Swedish pilot who a few months earlier had established the main relief air routes. Nigeria then declared that relief flights in the Biafra would no longer be tolerated unless they first permitted a Nigerian inspection for weapons and other contraband. Negotiations for daylight flights made no progress at this time. Both the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Joint Church Airlift continued to fly at night until June the 5th. That night, a Nigerian MiG shot down one of the Red Cross planes on a relief flight to Uli, and the Red Cross suspended its flights. This left Joint Church Aid as the only major supplier of relief materials still flying in the Biafra. This cut outside relief in half. The December harvest was disappointing. Kwashiorkor again began to spread, and by the fall of 1969, general starvation of the population in Biafra became a real threat. A report released by the U.S. Agency for International Development in July of 1969 showed a total of 3.5 million people in need of food and supplies in the war zone. And by December of 1969, Joint Church Aid estimated that 4 million Biafran civilians, mostly women and children, were dependent on airlift deliveries. Since then, the situation in Biafra has continued to deteriorate. Meanwhile, on June the 30th, federal government in Lagos had instructed the International Committee of the Red Cross to turn over all relief operations to the Nigerian Rehabilitation Commission and the Nigerian Red Cross. The government's public health survey over the summer of 1969 indicated that the 1 million people dependent on relief in the federal territory had declined to 450,000. But by discontinuing the coordinating role of the ICRC, the Nigerians found themselves pressed for funds for distribution. In November 1969, the Nigerian Red Cross stated that it was reaching only 250,000 people, although it expected to feed more. On the other side of the battle lines, Biafran self-help efforts were fruitful, but came nowhere near meeting the needs. For the blockaded people, survival is dependent on the continuation of the airlift flights. The Joint Church Airlift originates from the island of Sao Tome, about 300 miles off the coast of Nigeria. The island is now the center of relief efforts for Biafra. A steady stream of supplies have been shipped there for later flights in the Biafra. When possible, Biafran children are flown to Sao Tome for needed medical care and sometime relocation in Gabon or the Ivory Coast. The airlift flies a number of old C-97 stratofreighters obtained from the U.S. at scrap prices. Each of these planes carries a load of 16 tons and will normally make 2 or possibly 3 flights a night. The Nigerian blockade makes these flights extremely dangerous. So the planes fly without running lights and land on short fields. There are no lights on the runways until the last seconds before touchdown. Uli Airport is not really an airport. It's a widened section of highway cordoned off and lit with torches. The relief flights often land within sound of battle. When I went into Biafra last year, the DC-6 that I landed in was shot down 4 days later, and all of the crew, American and Scandinavian, perished. When I took off a week later, we were hit by a number of anti-aircraft bullets. This is common in Biafra every night. The supplies are unloaded in the dark and forwarded to distribution centers. From these centers, the relief materials are dispatched to hundreds of feeding stations situated throughout the countryside. Within 48 hours after the planes land, the supplies are being consumed. On a good night, the planes will make a total of 15 to 20 flights. They bring enough food for 2 ounces per person. That's just enough to maintain life, no more, for 24 hours. For most of these people, the usual diet consists of a small bowl of CSM, a high-protein corn, soya, and milk mixture. This meal is typically served between 6 and 8:30 in the morning, so that the populace can eat before the Nigerian air raids begin. Those in the sick bays may get food daily, but others get no more than 3 meals a week. Recent estimates say that nearly 2,000 people, mostly children, starve to death every day in Biafra. The United States and others have made some diplomatic efforts to get both sides to agree to a daylight airlift, or land or water delivery, routes for relief supplies. In August and September 1969, International Red Cross proposed internationally inspected, militarily inviolable relief flights for an experimental period. However, they could not define a set of terms acceptable to both Nigeria and Biafra. Nigerian promises that she would not violate daylight relief flights for military advantage are not acceptable to the Biafrans, who insist upon a neutral third-party guarantee. In a recent statement, U.S. Secretary of State William Rogers praised the Red Cross proposal and said that daylight flights under agreed procedures were the only practicable way to an immediate and substantial relief of the starvation problem. He said, the United States stands ready to continue its aid to the victims of the war. During my visit to Biafra last year, I had the privilege of speaking with Colonel Ojukwu for an hour-and-a-half interview. There was one statement he made which was shocking. I asked him what we in America could do to help the civilian population of Biafra. Colonel Ojukwu told me that although the people were extremely grateful to the various church groups and the Red Cross in America and in Europe, it was not the answer. The only answer was a negotiated truce. I asked him what we could do. And he said, the United States, being a superpower, had the strength to do a great deal. I asked him, what? Colonel Ojukwu told me that if the United States State Department made an official, and he underlined official, statement of sympathy for the Biafran people, he was certain it would result in Colonel Gowon of the Nigerian forces sitting down to the conference table with him without preconditions. So this is the situation in Biafra today. The war continues slowly. Federal Nigerian troops have made some headway. But Biafran determination and resistance is hardening while the fighting continues. Millions of civilians, primarily women and children, are facing starvation. Farm production has been greatly reduced, and outside supplies have to run the blockade. Nearly 2 million people have died. If you listen to the Biafrans, you get one set of answers. If you listen to Nigeria, you get another. Right now, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia is trying to mediate a peace through direct negotiations in Addis Ababa. But in the meantime, the starvation and hunger continues. The children are dying. Dead children outnumber dead soldiers 15 to 1. 2 ounces of food will keep a child alive another 24 hours. They're the lucky ones. The dying children get nothing. That would be wasting food. In 6 months, there may be no children left in Biafra.